conference in lovely and warm Mesa, Arizona. Our next speaker is, currently the director for the Clinic for Neuromuscular Disorders in Los Angeles, California. She's a neuroelectrical researcher and neuromuscular dance movement therapist. And this should prove interesting. And with that, I'd like to present to you Elinor Rigler Thal Gibbs.
First, we're going to have a videotape that I made with 3 of our patients at the clinic. These three will give you and tell you the story of what Neuro Kinesthetics is all about. There are 2 things that you should be following to understand. One is the torso return of quadriplegics and high-level paraplegics who may be totally complete. The second is,
I'm Joe
now, turn the sound down and start at the
taking my
beginning
shirt
of
off.
the videotape.
Losing my balance like that took place 3 years ago. Today I have a more functional torso balance, and I'm still a C6 complete quadriplegic.
They must be rewinding. This.
Okay, you want me to go right ahead with the videotape or wait for you?
Okay.
You want me to wait for you?
Okay, you may begin the videotape.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Joe McLean. You just saw me going off balance while taking my shirt off. Losing my balance like that took place 3 years ago. Today I have a more functional torso balance, and I'm still a C6 complete quadriplegic. Elinor starts her sessions by activating the body's nerves, which creates muscle tone and stretch reflex movement. She guides us in using our breath, for example, as a pressure generating system. She teaches us to be aware of what is happening in our bodies. She's named the little black boxes with their button-like white electrical stimulators kinesthetic activators. Kinesthetic is the awareness of your sensory system of balance. Here she is using 7 systems of kinesthetic activators. The myopulse plays an integrating role along with therapeutic exercises such as independent sitting, then doing torso twists. The stretch reflex controls your sitting balance. When I lift weights, you might think I have my triceps. I do not. I do it by using body leverage. The same is true for my playing ball. I developed the muscle tone for my triceps and hands, but still no hand initiation, no voluntary control. We added a small amount of dopamine to the protocol. I could set off a wrist reflex with opposing hand pressure, but those darn motor cells wouldn't fire. My torso lifts improved. My torso and hands continued to improve with muscle tone. My independent control of my torso lifts were much better coordinated. I was in great torso shape. Then I took a vacation for 3 months, and my muscle tone receded. Elinor was shocked. Together we rebuilt my muscle tone, used Elinor's know-how to see that my full torso balance was restored and that my ability to use my stretch reflex was at full range for movement. I'll maintain it with a home program. It has taken Elinor 33 years to understand and know how to give functional torso balance to quads like me. It's sensory-driven movement. As you can see, we've built up the muscle tone back some in my chest and my stomach, and we've improved the movement and balance of my torso. And also, I really love the natural look and tone of my hands. Dan was severely injured when he was ambushed and beaten while serving as a captain with the Special Forces in Nicaragua during the 80s. He received his hospital and rehabilitation care from the Veterans Administration. Dan explains his goals.
Joint balance is the one thing that I want to achieve because I'm leaning too much on my left side, causing skin breakdowns that have occurred over the last 2 years on my left issue. So hopefully correcting that trunk balance will diminish any skin problems on my left issue and return me back to having normal skin on my body.
Dan needs total assistance to come to a sitting posture. He has some use of his right arm, but he is still unable to feed himself. His left arm is still severely injured. Learning to cough is a prerequisite. The kinesthetic activators lengthen the muscle and bring blood into the muscle. This creates the muscle tone, which creates the reflex energy for reflex movement. Integration of the muscle tone, facilitating the reflex movement, is integrated by the myopulse. The balance of the muscle action develops with movement exercise. You can see Dan's independent coordinated balance as he sits in his chair. Dan's supination of his left arm is one indication of being incomplete. The VA also gave him the incomplete diagnosis. Dan is now using his right arm to grab Tina. He uses it to feed himself and brush his teeth. Dan's balanced posture keeps improving as well as his body control. Dan is sitting with minimal assistance, but he is also simultaneously coordinating his right arm in dance-like movements. Dan went on vacation with Tina to Puerto Rico.
I am a man who is recovering from a stroke I had on June 12th, 1998 at 4:30 driving on the 210 freeway on my way to a track meet. My blood pressure at the time was 240/130. They said I wasn't going to make it through the night. We fooled them. God has plans for me, and I have plans to get well. April 5th of 1979, I set a world's record in the 200 meters. For people over 30, I ran 21:02 electronic. At age 34, I was national champion in the 400 meters at 47.1.
In stroke, the body's sensory systems are in disorder. Notice Hilliard's atrophied left pectorals, his contracted and atrophied left hand, his very limited ability to lift his left arm. He has a left drop foot when he walks. His dropped left foot is obvious. His use of his left arm is totally limited by his contractions. The sensory change begins to take effect with the kinesthetic activators. The contractures are relaxed. A new balance in muscle alignment takes place to enable the muscle to respond to motor initiation. Watch as Hilliard is able to initiate a much higher level of arm extension. Hilliard's gastrocs are being lengthened and strengthened with the MyoPulse. This enables an improved gait for walking. This 7th session, Hilliard's left pectoralis is more in balance with his right. His deltoids have better definition, are more developed. His left arm is straighter. Notice the great width of his hand, developed by the activation of muscle tone. Hilliard rode the bike for 40 minutes with 12 sets of kinesthetic activators strategically placed on the left side of his body. The combination of 6 mono and 6 bipolar facilitated an integration of his sensory to motor movement process. Look at Hilliard's stride. Yes, Elinor takes safety precautions. There is an AFO on his weak left ankle providing stability. The cane in his right hand balances the cross coordination with his left leg. He has to walk before he runs, then sprints again.
Awareness is our key to understanding neurokinesthetics. Researched neurological information created the sensory protocols upon which our movement redevelopment evolves. This kinesthetic sensory system may be disrupted so easily by traumas, causing the neuromuscular disorders of stroke, spinal cord injury, and other movement problems. However, this kinesthetic sensory system is available for regaining reflex, then initiated movement when there are no blocking spinal cord lesions. Your kinesthetic sense in reality is your vestibular system of interneural spinal cord spatial balance, our spatial body sense. All of us should be kinesthetically aware of our conscious updating of our spatial body sense for coordinating our body's balance in movement. Muscle tone is the leverage for our spatial body's balance. Muscle tone is also our energy leverage for our spatial driving force in movement, reflex and initiated. The driving force is neurologically defined as the spatial or static gamma servo control system integrated in with what is called or known as the 1A afferent from the kinesthetic muscle spindle. Thank you. There are 2 stories in this video. One for spinal cord, stroke, and many other neuromuscular disorders. For especially spinal cord, that you can give a return of the torso, not necessarily the arms or the lower limbs, but the torso. And that, the other story is the spinal cord of the torso, the interneural paths, is your sense of body self, your vestibular sense of self. Now, both of these stories have never been defined before. Nobody, as far as I know, have been able to give quads their torso movement. If they're incomplete, they will be able to gain movement of their limbs. But if they're complete, such as Joe, the person who narrated this videotape, they're going to have their torso movement, which is their sense of self. They're going to be much more independent in what they can do. They're going to be healthier because They're going to be able to cough and speak louder and clearer and function with their torso. They will be able to sit up in training unassisted, and the total cost for bringing in the torso, where you are able to achieve all these things, is less than half that the VA is spending just to give their quads a cough, but no torso movement. This spinal cord work needs to be replicated at an institution that has great ability, understanding, respect of the entire world. Because until this research is done with approximately 20 people, that I will bring back torso movement, it will just be something that floats along, and I don't want it to float along. And that's my goal for the year that is coming, is to find a place that will take charge of this research development, monitor it, so that as I work and I enable people to gain their torso movement again, then it will allow me to define the second story that I think is so important. That story is we have a sense of our body in our spinal cord. It's under the control of the vestibular system. Now, the vestibular system has many satellites called muscle spindles. How many of you have ever heard of a muscle spindle? What has happened and what needs to be done, and it probably will be done over the internet, is for people to understand really how their movement systems work. Now, there are two movement systems. One is the motor, and the other is the sensory. When I was in a class at UCLA, we were observing movement behavior, and we were studying the tennis serve. And I'm going to demonstrate to you the two ways of the tennis serve in the class for people in physical education and in dance. You're going to realize that the dance people use a sensory awareness mode of movement, and the physical education people use a perceptual controlled drive. Now, this is how the physical education people did a serve. This is how the dance people did a serve. They stood, they got a sense of their body, the balance, the positioning, and they very much slower took that ball and lifted it and then swung. They had a sensory awareness going into the body. Actually, the sensory awareness shift is that the muscle lengthens before it contracts. Whereas in a motor, what happens is the person gets their set and goes, and the muscle contracts. Now, what happens in many of the things which point out, it's the sensory system that has the breakdown in trauma. So when the person wants to initiate a move, if the sensory system is not functional, the movement is locked. Now, I will show you, and you have this in your packet of information. This is from my thesis, my UCLA thesis. 1973. And we got to bring it down. Okay, here it is. Now, the motor system I talk about, okay, does it go? Okay, here it goes. The motor system, you see the cortical monosynaptic alpha facilitation onto the motor neuron? It's just one straight line. It's a direct drive. Now look at the complexity, the structure of the sensory system. Is that the awareness controls the feedback that loops to the cerebellum and is integrated in all the motor systems. And then what it also does, I'm going to introduce you to the gamma motor system, which if you haven't heard of a muscle spindle, you've never heard of the gamma motor system. The gamma motor system is your leverage and balance for movement. If you don't have good leverage and if you don't have good balance, your movement will not be as functional as it should. And this is what happens with people with stroke and spinal cord, is that this system right here is totally loused up, disordered. So if it's disordered, movement will be limited, inhibited, disrupted. What I'm doing is bringing back the gamma system, the system of leverage and balance. Now, this system of leverage and balance, you were all babies at one time. Most of you were married and have kids, right? A baby's movement development is this sensory system. Remember, the first thing they do is they lift their head, and then they start to get the back movement. This is a stretch reflex. And as they get the back movement, they begin to crawl and begin to sit up, and they're held in body position by the stretch reflex. And then, as they're crawling, they begin to stand. They're beginning to test themselves and how this whole balance of the torso, how they can control it with their legs. Now, I have a grandson who just turned a year. And I'm just going to show some of his pictures. And I'm going to show you a picture of his falling. Look how beautifully balanced he is in his fall. The stretch reflex is allowing him to fall in absolute balance. And you know, a baby never hurts themselves. But if we should fall, uh-oh, we might hurt ourselves, you know, break a leg or a hip. But the symmetry of his body, the balance of his body, developed as a baby, this kinesthetic system, is the basis of the movement. And then how do we lose it? We do. I've got a few other pictures of him, and I'm just going to put them up very quickly. This is on his first birthday. Look how aware he is. Nobody is giving him instructions on what to do. You can't tell a baby exactly. I mean, you can give them a toy, and then they discover it very innovatively. His standing balance, his control, his climbing, his sense of achievement as he climbs on backwards. This is the system that a child should never lose. This is a system totally developed, which will allow a person to focus and attend to information in school as he goes through the years. When I returned to UCLA, one of my goals was to understand the relationship of movement to learning. And the more I have done this work, I have realized the relationship is to shift the person back into a sensory kinesthetic mode of being so they can attend better, because you remember, if you're relaxed, you can focus better and you can absorb information much better. Now, the next thing I want to share with you is the muscle spindle. The understanding of the muscle spindle was developed by a man by the name of Matthews in England. This is his drawing. Now, the muscle spindle is emotional. Have you heard of neurotransmitters? Okay. There's 2 neurotransmitters on this muscle spindle. There's your dynamic gamma motor, and there's your static gamma motor. I did a research to document what these neurotransmitters were in 1989. This is really your bipolar emotional system of the body. The dynamic gamma motor, as it has as a transmitter noradrenaline or dopamine. And this dynamic system monitors the rate of change of the muscle, the speed at which the muscle is changing for movement. Now, the static system, which for me is the key to this whole kinesthetic system. The static system has serotonin as its neurotransmitter. Now, the static system does many interesting things. One, it monitors the length of the muscle. Now you have breaks on the muscle. It's called Golgi tendon organs. They're the neural receptors at the ends of the muscle and the tendons. Now these are the breaks of the muscle. And what seems to happen in trauma is that these Golgi tendon organs move towards the center of the muscle. and limits the range of motion, or sometimes totally stops a muscle from moving. Now, this static system that I'm talking about, showing you right here, monitors the length of the muscle, but this muscle spindle has two afferents. I'm going to discuss the group 2 first. Because it's the group 2, which is the static serotonin, is the neurological functioning which inhibits the Golgi tendon organs. It takes the brakes off for movement. Unless you take the brakes off for movement, you're limited. You saw my kinesthetic activators. That's exactly what they do. They activate the serotonin to take the brakes that are limiting the movement of the muscle, so giving them a greater freedom range of movement when they're activated. Now, this group 2 afferent, have you ever heard of the cerebellum that sits back of your head right here and is the coordinator? Have you ever really understood it? Took me a long time to understand it. But the group 2 can take charge of the output of the cerebellum. And what we're talking about is a feedback system from the muscles of the body to the spinal cord. Now, I'll share a little bit of information with you. What is happening in the body goes to the spinal cord. But then, for the information to be transported to the cerebellum and the reticular formation and up to the cortex, it needs the cortical feedback system. That's this system. Oh. That's this system. It's your feedback control. Simply said, your mind has to take charge of the information in the spinal cord and take it up to higher centers. If your mind does not do this, and I have patients who their bodies are functioning fine, but they have no awareness of what's going on. You can call them body deaf. They don't listen, they don't pay attention to their body. They've turned off their feedback system. So, this kinesthetic system is the one that takes charge of the information in the spinal cord and takes it to higher centers. And it takes the group 2 to the cerebellum for coordinating the feed-forward movement of balance. Our society has been so intent upon the what is called the alpha motor neuron initiation, that it hasn't paid any attention to the reciprocal balance of the body. Like, I'm standing here, I'm totally aware of my balance. I'm using this kinesthetic sensory system to maintain my balance. Out of my balance, I'm going to move. But what has happened over the years, there hasn't been this emphasis on the body's sensory balance system. Though the Orientals, yoga, Tai Chi, all of the Japanese systems use the sensory system first before they do a movement. So I want to go back and talk about this group 2. Now this group 2, you must think of it like a rudder on your body. And the reason why this group 2 functions very interestingly. It functions in the extensor system, and it also functions in the flexor system. Now, this is a flexor and this is an extensor. You have these two different sets of muscles. Now, the interesting thing, this flexor system called Flexor Reflex Afferents is the one that sets up here, and you'll find, okay, here you go. Find this in your paper. I get a Kleenex. Now, the flexor reflex afferents are abbreviated as FRAs. And these FRAs, okay, you do a flexor, practically all your afferents here are flexor reflex afferents. They're in every part of the muscle, and the blood vessels, and wherever on your body. Now, group 2 afferent is a member of the flexor reflex afferents. And this is the system that develops your awareness. This is the system that creates your body image in the cortex. This is the system that creates the body image in your cortex that is in charge of your feedback control from your spinal cord. This is the system that the baby has, but our emphasis in our society upon the motor action, somehow we lose it. Unless you go take karate or yoga or meditation and start to get it back. This is where I feel our school systems are going to have to change their physical education programs and have it much more oriented to the sensory program of movement. Now, I focused on the group 2. Now I want to go back and focus on the dynamic motor, which is your speed. And your dynamic motor and your static motor combine into the group 1A afferent. Here, I gotta move it down. Which is this this afferent right here. Now, between the static and the dynamic, there's always a balance. And this balance, you can see it in your great athletes. They have a fantastic static system and a dynamic rate of change system that is so in balance that the better they are in achieving their goals, the better this system is functioning. This is their leverage for movement. This is the leverage system that's wiped out in stroke and spinal cord, but it can be reestablished. Now, you saw Joe in the video. When Joe went off without a home program, he atrophied again, right? We put him back on what I jokingly say, a high dosage of the kinesthetic activators, the myopulse, the exercise, and it all came back. At first, my heart dropped when I saw Joe. And then I realized what Joe did for me. He gave me the gift that the spinal cord is your sense of your body, because the transmission from the brainstem couldn't get through to the spinal cord. But what did we do, like they do with the electric buses? We put an outside capacitator, developed the muscle tone, and kept this electrical stimulator, kinesthetic activator going so that the muscle tone will be maintained, because the muscle tone is your energy for movement. If you don't have the appropriate muscle tone, your movement is diminished. Now, so we go back to the, and you'll notice here, the Flexor reflex afferents, they can work two ways. They can either activate or inhibit the 1A interneuron. All of this is spatial facilitation. They can allow that alpha motor neuron to fire to contract the muscle, or they can keep that alpha motor neuron from firing and relax the muscle. All this control takes place in the interneural pathways of your spinal cord. And this is the system with spinal cords that need to be rehabilitated first. But what we get with the complete quads is only the stretch reflex. But with the stretch reflex, you're able to sit up. The muscle tone in between your ribs have been developed. You can breathe much easier. You can function much easier. You can speak with greater ease. And it's this system, the feedback, reflex, stretch, reflex, that allows the quad, spinal cord completes to function. Yes, they will need a home program. They will need one of these little black boxes to keep that muscle tone generated. Now I ask you, how many of you know what a stretch reflex is? 1, 2. Every one of you, I'm sure, has always experienced a stretch reflex. And this is probably why the stretch reflex system has been put down, kicked out. Nobody dares touch it. There's a brilliant man by the name of Sir Charles Sherrington. a neurophysiologist at the turn of the century. He was the one, in one little conversations, he was saying that the stretch reflex is your sexual orgasm. That the gain control that the spinal cord works through is the same gain control that you have experienced in your own sexual experiences. And for that reason, this whole sensory system in our society has been put down, not developed, not been made available, while the total focus has been on what we consider the alpha motor neuron system. This may be just the beginning and opening for all of us. There's a tremendous work to be done for education, for understanding, for communication. It's almost like this is the female system that in olden times was put down. You don't talk up, you don't say, you don't get an education. I was at the end of this time when my father told me the story of Einstein's theory of relativity, and only, he said, 9 people understood it. And I said to myself, but I understand it. I never said it to my father because I was only a girl, and a girl wasn't supposed to understand these things. So actually, this system is the same system that Einstein worked out his theory of relativity. Your muscle tone mass is your energy for movement, or your energy for movement is dependent upon your muscle tone mass, however you want to say it. Now, all of you probably noticed my name. The 10 Commandments said, honor your mother and your father. But in our society, only the father was honored. My mother is honored on equal standing with my father. Wrigler is my mother's maiden name, and Thal is my maiden name, and Gibbs is my husband and my children's name. It's time, and it's happening so fast, and I'm glad I've had the opportunity to be part of this female revolution that has taken place, and has really taken place from the time that I was at UCLA. I was there in '69 for the revolution, or whatever you want to call it, that took place. Made me 20 years younger as I thought, like my cohorts who were in university at the same time as I was. But I went back, my undergraduate degree was in '53, and I went back in '69. In between, I had 4 children and a married life. But I hope what I want to do is to see that what I've developed for spinal cords is made available to all who are spinal cords who want it. You've got to want it. You have to be motivated. The other thing is what I want to do is in totality write the sense of your body, which is your vestibular spinal cord. Thank you. Yes. Do I have time?
I don't know.
Yes, sir.
Yes.
We do? We'll take it. Okay.
Okay.
All right, who's gonna be first? Looks like
Right.
I got several hands up.
Right.
What
Right.
do you recommend for people out of state who are interested? What arrangements can you make for them?
I can make any arrangements. I mean, we have to set the financial arrangement, but I can make the time. Yes.
Have you got a way to train professional people so that they can work in various institutions? Like we have a Bryan Center here in Phoenix,
Mm-hmm.
and they specialize in therapy, and I know that.
I can train. I want to train. I love teaching.
Do you have something presently available?
It has to be organized,
Okay.
but that takes finances, yes.